This is Socially Triggered, and this video actually took several weeks for me to make. Um, I don't know. It was one of those things where I really didn't know how to start this video. I've been sort of shocked by the response that our governments have taken. And this video, I really wanted to address that side of the coronavirus outbreak, because that's all that we can think about nowadays. We can only think about the coronavirus because that's something that's dominating our very lives. A lot of the times, my family kind of sees me as somebody who is a bit of a conspiracy theorist. If you watch my earlier videos on the coronavirus, I was sort of predicting that it could have a very high death rate. I was predicting that even before what we were seeing in Italy. And the reason I predicted that was based on just I could see that the system could get overwhelmed. And I was making those kind of predictions back in early February. And it happened. It happened because it was sort of obvious. It's one of those things where you can sort of see these kind of things if you look at the patterns. I don't see those same patterns in the US. I do not see those same patterns in Canada. And there's reasons for that. But I see something that's far worse than the coronavirus. And it's actually, to me, a very scary thing. And that is what has happened with our society. The government has been able, like, what I wanted when I made those videos was the government to take action, to take basic action. And the basic action you take is you test people. You make it so that it's easier to get, you deregulate the healthcare system so you can basically get treatments provided quicker. Because what happens is they have to go through a long approval process in order to get medications available, to get test kits available, to get all the basic things that you need when dealing with a very quick onset new bacteria or a virus or some kind of plague. And that's what you have to do. You have to deregulate sometimes in order to be able to respond quickly to an emergency. And so that's what I kind of wanted. I wanted the government to take those kind of actions. Other actions I wanted them to take was to close down the borders in a way where you basically quarantine people that are coming into the country. You limit access to exposed areas. So, for example, when China was kind of going through its crisis, I would have liked to have seen, travel restricted from, especially from Wuhan, because that's really where the infection was happening. Those basic things should have been done, those basic precautions. And that's really all I expected. And that could slow down the virus. Because if you don't bring it in, you can basically stop the spread. But what happened was the governments didn't take any action. And then when they did take action in March, what they did was they went heavy-handed. So the problem is governments do that. They're very slow to react, but when they do, they generally overreact. So instead of just doing the basic things that I described, making test kits available, providing basic resources to combat a disorder like this, they went further. They said basically they quarantined the whole nation, and they basically stopped the economic engine of the country. They, in Canada, what we're doing is we're actually blocking businesses from running. If you have a business with multiple employees, well, you're not allowed to run that business. You have to basically close it down and send all your staff home where they have to self-quarantine. Well, the way I see this is it's kind of like a butterfly effect. Butterfly, the butterfly effect is the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings can cause tornadoes or storms on the other side of the planet because it's a buildup. Well, this is a big butterfly. These are big companies that we all are dependent on each other. So my business, I do marketing. I am a marketing specialist, and I have about 20 employees. And what's happened is all my employees rely on me they for their income, and I rely on my clients to generate that income that I can pay them with. And what happens is most of my clients are service oriented businesses. They could be restaurants, dentists, roofers, and these kind of businesses are not allowed to run anymore because the government has shut them down. And the result is basically, well, they can't hire me anymore because they're not even allowed to run their businesses. So what ends up happening is they basically say, well, sorry, can we just pause it for a month, the work that you're doing? Can we stop for a little while until this gets sorted out? And I'm like, well, okay, I guess so, not much choice. And then I'm in a situation where, do I fire employees? Do I, cut back on their hours? Do I do things to mitigate my costs that I have? And then what happens is those employees, well, they have to mitigate their costs, and it just sort of butterfly effects where businesses kind of all depend on each other. And when one goes down, the others start coming down as well. It's like dominoes. So what ends up happening is people don't have the basic things that they need to survive after a while, because the companies that are required to produce those things are no longer able to produce them because they can't get the supply chains working. So what could happen is when you have this kind of situation, you want to be able to rev up business. You want to actually encourage business to kind of respond and take action. And actually, I did see that. The funny thing is, I see all these entrepreneurs really having such great entrepreneurial spirit. They're coming up with innovative solutions for how people can work from home better. They have things where they encourage real relief for the hurt people by this outbreak. And they actually are doing things to really protect people and help people. But the government is coming in and stopping all that. And that's exact opposite of what you want. You want the business to be able to support the people. But what government is doing is saying, hey, we're the ones that know best. And we're the ones that should decide who and what gets done. And when you have that, that's a real problem, because the government is just saying, well, we'll spend X billions of dollars on you. And basically, it's like a socialist takeover. So generally what you want is a free economy, right? Where the businesses can do what they need to do in order to solve whatever problem it is. Like it's supply and demand. If you create a demand of a crisis, that's a huge demand, and that creates a situation where you can really produce a lot of stuff and a lot of services that can help. So it's kind of cool. It's like, in a weird way, a crisis like this is like gold to entrepreneurs, because it gives them so much inspiration in order to come up with solutions. So the goal is, having that ability to inspire these businesses to come up with solutions. Like one of the business ideas that I even had was like, if the technology to create these test kits is actually pretty easy to come by, and just making the test kits could be something that you could do if you set the resources to do it. But there's so many government regulations that prevent you from doing that as a private business. So, business could respond to it, but the government is preventing it. And to make things even worse is the government saying incredibly stupid things. So one of the things that they're saying is that they're saying, if you are a business affected by the crisis, and every business is affected by the crisis, by the way, then they will support you. They will give you money and blah, blah, blah. And they also say this to people. So typically in Canada, we get about 20,000 EI, which is unemployment insurance for those people that lost their jobs during whatever, their company changed, they lost their job, or they, got laid off for whatever reason. They can go on what's called government insurance, which they pay into. It's money that they paid into, that while they're transitioning between jobs, they can sort of rely on that money to sort of tie them over between jobs. And that's called EI in Canada. And the claims for it are usually around, on any given week, around 20 to 30,000. And this week, there was 500,000 claims. That's a huge number of claims, like like 20 times normal. In the US, the same kind of claims were around 3 million, which is, they said it's like multiple times, even worse than the Great Depression. And this is all because of the fact that the government is preventing businesses from running. And this is the time when you want businesses to run. Now, what's even worse is in my mind, this virus is kind of like a Trojan horse for a socialist takeover. It's an excuse. Like if I had told you like a month ago or 2 months ago that a government could basically imprison all of its people and tell them what they're allowed or not allowed to do, you would think I was crazy. Nobody would ever agree to that. The people would rise up and they would rebel against their government. But that's exactly what's happening. We're told, like in my little town, we're told not to even allow play dates where the kids can't even see their friends. Everyone has to be isolated, and they even close the playgrounds. So you're not even allowed to have very basic connection with anyone in the neighborhood. And all the stores are closed, except for a few. And even the ones that are open, they have these things where you're only allowed to go in small groups so that you keep that social distancing. Well, this is just like Venezuela when you have the lines for food, right? It's that level. And the other thing that has happened is it's created this whole subsistence living where people are told that, we know that you're not allowed to work, and we are going to compensate you. We're going to give you money. The government is saying this. And that's a socialist system that everybody is basically relying on the government for handouts. And that is a very scary thing to me. And we didn't vote for this. We didn't. And this is not even the best way to deal with the virus. As I said, like the best way was to do simple measures that were easy to implement, help businesses rev up in order to come up with solutions, and also have things where businesses can come up with solutions to fight the virus. But that's the exact opposite of what we did. And in fact, what we've done is limited the government's own ability to treat this virus because they won't be able to get the resources. So there's shortages of masks, there's shortages of gloves, there's shortages of test kits, there's shortages of all these things that we need to fight the virus. And it's because the government has taken this monopoly stance of the economy. It's literally taken over the economy and jailed all the citizens of all the nations, prevented them from leaving their homes as a means of total control. This is like very totalitarian, where our governments are basically have become these socialist empires. So, you probably think I'm crazy when I say this, but look around, look at what the situation is. A lot of people thought, oh, this is, we have to do this because it's a crisis. But I believe in freedom. I believe that people can make those decisions for themselves, that people can think, hey, look, I know that there's a virus out there. What am I going to do to protect myself? And the great thing about what's happening right now is they come up with these propaganda stories. The big famous one that they do right now is the story of Daytona Beach, where a lot of these young kids were going there and partying, and they were ignoring the whole social distancing propaganda. And some of them got infected as a result, and they probably won't die of it because they're pretty young. But what's happening is that story becomes like, oh, those evil children, they don't know what they're doing, and we have to tell them what to do. And we have to prevent them from hurting others. When the truth of the matter is, what you want to have happen is you want the social distancing. You want people to make that decision for themselves. So, for example, if I saw like some young kid, well, what would happen is after a while, you'd say, well, those young kids, they don't follow the rules and they might have the virus. And as an older person, like let's say if I was 80 or something, I would kind of socially distance from them. I'd stay away from them because they would be at a risk for me. And that would just be the way you would handle it. And people can make those decisions for themselves. That's the freedom way of handling it. Now, the government instead just closes down the beaches, prevents people from interacting. But what actually, if you had taken it the way I just described, where you allow personal freedom, actually what would end up happening is those children who are exposing themselves to the virus would get the virus, and there would be a spread. There would be a huge number of cases within that younger generation. But what would end up happening is because they are young, they're able to fight off the virus. And they would end up becoming dead ends to the virus and the ability for it to spread. And what you would have is sort of this weird herd immunity being created. And that herd immunity would actually protect the older people. It's kind of a weird situation where, in a way, you kind of want to encourage the spread to a certain extent, where you socially distance on the side where people are most vulnerable. So you basically protect those who need protecting, and you allow those who are the most resistant to it to get themselves exposed. And that creates this weird herd immunity. So there's so many things that they did wrong. And what I see ultimately is a much more dangerous situation. And twofold. One, we have this totalitarian regime now, a one world order, if you may, where all the world governments have kind of lockstepped into basically imprisoning their peoples by quarantining their whole nations and shutting down the business within their nations. And that power is very hard to give up for governments. That control and the fact that they can use this fear of this virus to control people is very scary, because governments are not very good at giving up power. They generally love to hold it, and they'll keep it, and they'll say, oh, there's always an emergency, and they'll always find some reason to have more control and maintain that control. So that's one element of fear in my mind. Other element that I see is the economy, that we basically are shutting down the economy. And it's very hard to restart it once things go beyond a certain point where things have fallen so much, especially when you have this controlling government that's not going to allow it to restart. Generally, what will end up happening, and this is the future that I see, is they'll probably lift the regulations on business, and then they'll do the following. They'll say, okay, now it's a new crisis. They love their crises. They'll say it's a new crisis about economics, and we got to save the businesses. Well, how do they do that? They basically come in with more government support, more government funding, more government bailouts. And what does that do? That creates even weaker businesses. Businesses that have to rely on governments to support themselves are not strong businesses. In fact, they're the opposite. And generally what will happen is you'll get more and more government control over business. And that's even scarier than the situation that we're in now. So, and there's a third element, that this slowdown of the economy, because as I said, this is something where the businesses can't really recover, and their recovery will be slowed by this government control. What's going to happen is our world isn't designed for the number of people that we have. I remember seeing a video like a long time ago where they were talking about how there was 1 billion people on the planet, and or there was like a couple billion people, I think, actually at the time. It's like from the 50s. And at the time they were saying, well, maybe the world could support 4 billion people, but that would be it. That would be all that it could support. It could only support about 4 billion people. Now, there has been technologies that have allowed us to be able to support way more than that. But for the most part, there's some truth in that number. And the reason that it's true is if you don't have interconnected businesses where you have real-time delivery and all these kind of things where you can sort of systematically get things to where they need to be very, very quickly and have all the pieces coming from all the different areas, supply chains, then what happens is if you can get all those things happening, then you can actually feed the whole entire world easily. But as the economy breaks down, you get all these pieces starting to fall apart and they don't stick together anymore. The things kind of fall apart. And that's when you have an issue where the world can't support that number of people. And it's more likely that the virus will probably kill millions of people at its worst extent, but more likely thousands or tens of thousands. But the economic slowdown could kill literally half the planet. Like it could be quite serious because we won't be able to support all the people on the planet. Because even this slowdown right now, we are looking at food shortages. Like, it starts out with the toilet paper and then becomes like something more serious, right? Because you get these slowdowns where you can't deliver the products that people need on time. And the demand, you'll get hoarding, you'll get all these kind of elements where people they'll be uncertain about whether or not they can get the goods that they need. And then what you'll get is rationing, and governments will step in and try to control it even more. And that will even, exacerbate the problem because they'll try to put price controls on it. And that's always one of the things that they do. They say, oh, those evil capitalists, they gouging people. But what ends up happening is if, let's say, you raise the prices on toilet paper. When I bought toilet paper, it's normally $9 for toilet paper. It was $27, so 3 times the normal price. And I was like, do I really want to buy this toilet paper? but I bought it because I needed it. And that's kind of the supply and demand element of capitalism. Now, if you're a socialist and the government's trying to encourage socialism, what people will say, well, that toilet paper should still be $9. But if you think about it, if it's $27, what's going to happen is more companies are going to be like, wow, I can make huge money. I can make a killing on toilet paper, and toilet paper is relatively easy to make. So I'll make more toilet paper. And so what ends up happening is businesses, when they see a spike in the price, end up responding to that spike by producing more of that. Okay? More of whatever it is that people are demanding. And that brings the price back down. There's sort of checks and balances. So what happens though, if you say, okay, we're going to fix the price at $9, well, during a crisis, those businesses are going to be like, well, I can't actually still produce it for the rate that I used to be able to produce it. So, and there's no money to be made at it because the governments are not allowing for that price spike. So I'm going to cut down on the supply of it. Well, what happens then, you get this kind of cyclical thing where, or cycle that is created where businesses will say, okay, it's still $9 and there's no way we can produce it. And they're going to produce less and less and less of it. So what ends up happening is when the government fixes the price, they actually are discouraging businesses from being able to produce more of that and basically there's going to be a shortage of supply and no solution to fix it because there's never ever the price associated with fixing that problem. Because you've controlled the price, the demand is higher, but you haven't allowed the price to reflect that higher demand. So then you'll get hoarding. It just becomes much, much worse. So this is why you don't want price fixing, even though it seems like a nice thing. It's there's always the sad, sappy story where some elderly person can't buy their toilet paper because they're on a fixed income, and that's true. They won't be able to buy it. But if you have these situations where businesses are encouraged by a higher price, then they'll actually come up with a solution so that elderly person might suffer for a week, but the next week they'll get their toilet paper. But as I said, once you have governments mandating prices, you can have some serious, serious issues. And that's what we're having in general, that the governments are coming in and telling businesses, first, we're not going to let you do business. Second, we're not going to allow you to determine the price of your products. And third, they're going to say, well, you can't even run your business because you have employees and those employees are going to be next to each other and we got to socially distance you. And they're going to force all these businesses to fire employees or to send them home to work. And that will also dramatically prevent businesses from coming up with a solution to solve this coronavirus problem. Now, all of this stuff that I've been saying is a bit of doom and gloom. I admit that, and it sounds like the whole world's going to die, and I don't think that's going to happen. I see the future in the way that makes most sense. What will end up happening is some governments will do what I described. They'll get more heavy-handed about it, and they will fail. They will definitely fail if they continue that method. Now, in the United States, you have Trump. Now, Trump is a business person. He kind of gets it to a certain extent. He's not the greatest business person, actually, to tell you the truth, but he's a business person. And he gets it to a certain extent. And his presidency, his re-election, depends on the economy. So what he's going to say is, well, okay, we need to get this economy going again because it's it's the one thing that everyone knows about me, that I made the economy great. And if he doesn't make the economy great, then he's no longer the person that he says he is. So what ends up happening is he doesn't get reelected. So he wants to get reelected. So he wants to make the economy boom again so that he goes out, with that on his record that he was the great president that made America great. So his thing is he's been hinting at that by Easter that they want to remove the restrictions on business and get businesses running again. Also, another thing that I see that's very positive coming from Trump is that he's very into deregulation, which is good, which is, as I said, one of those necessary things in order to encourage businesses to do what they need to do in order to achieve, economic success, rebuild the economy, and also treat the virus at the same time. You need the businesses to be stimulated. And generally, what I see in places like Canada, we have more of a socialist kind of government, especially with Trudeau. He's like a bit of an idiot. He's actually thinking of raising taxes. He was actually trying to seek a War Measure Act to raise taxes to pay for all the stimulus that he's putting out. Well, if nobody can work, where are these taxes going to come from? It's just crazy the way he thinks. So what ends up happening is governments like Trudeau in Canada and other governments overseas, they will actually have to follow Trump's suit, follow his path, because they will try their ways. They'll try their socialist kind of ways of thinking, and it will fail. It will definitely fail. And if they don't get their economies going, they will lose their jobs too. Fortunately, in Canada, we have a situation where we have Trudeau, but he has a minority government. And this could be a way to get rid of him because people will be just like, well, we don't have any confidence in you, and the government will collapse, which would be great. Get a conservative government in there that knows what they're doing, has an understanding of an economy, and hopefully gets things moving again. So these are the situations that I see in the world, and I know this seems like a bit of a ramble. I just have so many thoughts about this, about this virus. I don't see it as being as dangerous as I might have suggested in my earlier videos. I do see it as a danger. Like, it's going to have a high death rate, mainly because of the population being elderly and less healthy than it should be. That's the problem with the US and Canadian populations. We're generally a little bit older and a little bit less healthy. We have a high level of obesity in Canada and US, and we are not as fit as we should be, which makes us a little bit more prone to die from such a virus. But I do believe that people will protect themselves. Like we kind of learned how to socially distance now, and people will naturally do it as long as the governments don't tell us to not be racist to or not to be discriminatory and go around hugging each other. We should be fine. When people act in their own self-interests, they generally do the right thing, and they protect themselves by socially distancing naturally. You don't have to tell people to do it. They'll naturally do it. So I always believe in freedom, and I believe in people's ability to come up with innovative solutions to solve their own problems. We don't need to rely on government to be the one to figure out how to solve this problem. We can sort of figure it out on our own. And I actually have a lot of faith in humanity. And not many people do nowadays. And I want people to really realize that people are not as bad as you might think they are. We can when we're coddled too much, yes, humanity kind of sucks. But when we're put on our own and taught to sort of make our own stance, we generally do what's best for ourselves. And that ends up working out to being what's best for society. So I'm a big proponent of freedom and of the free market and capitalism. And I believe that those are actually the solutions to dealing with a crisis like this. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd love to hear people's feedback. It was actually hard for me to make this video because I have so many ideas and there's so many things that are bothering me that are happening. I'm really worried about the fact that the governments have really overstepped and basically taken away everyone's personal freedoms. And that's, I just know historically governments are not very good at giving things back. So once they take your freedom, they're not very good about giving it back. So that makes me nervous, but I do have some hope that people will tire of this and they will respond and they will get rid of any government that makes this go on too long. So hopefully that's what we'll see. And the future is very uncertain, but I have faith in humanity and in the human spirit. And yeah, that's been my video. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Check out my other stuff. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.